Are we good? Can you hear me? Is that better? Hello everyone, welcome again. I'm Sylvie Hodes, I'm a YSPC member this World Water Week. I've been organising this seminar series, The Art of Water Diplomacy, alongside Christina Arango, Aaron Solsberg and Marco Keskinen, who we'll be hearing from a little bit later today. Thank you all for coming, both those here and those listening online. And a big thank you to our co-conveners, who we couldn't have done this without. That's the IUCN, EcoPeace Middle East, and UNESCO, and of course our key collaborating partner, the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A reminder that this is the second of a three-part series on the art of water diplomacy, so join us again tomorrow at 2 p.m, room 27, in person only, I'm afraid, to dive behind the scenes into some case studies. Just in case you missed yesterday's session, let's just cover what we mean when we talk about water diplomacy. Can you hear me? Now better. We came up with a definition. This is by no means the only definition, but it is one that our entire team could agree upon. Water diplomacy is a dynamic, politically oriented process that aims to address and resolve conflicts and disagreements over shared water resources by making use of diplomatic tools and other means across multiple diplomacy tracks. When we talk about water diplomacy as an art, we're looking beyond just the science-based, more technical aspects of the process, which of course is still a vital component, but we are also referring to the steps taken to build, strengthen, and sustain relationships and political will, which really enables cooperation. In yesterday's session, which I believe you can still find the recording of online, we discussed the importance of diagnosing a problem by defining different issues as either simple, complicated, or complex, and applying appropriate tools to translate solutions into reality. We also discussed that we need to map not only the watershed, but also the problem shared. That's the first step, agreeing upon a problem, but then also a policy shared. We all are in the context of the political reality, and that is an important thing to acknowledge in this context. We're going to have a few short presentations and then move on to our panel. There will be time for a short Q&A after these presentations, so get your questions ready. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Alejandro Iza. Dr. Iza has been the director of the Environmental Law Center of IUCN since 2005 and is the co-director of its Bridge program, that's Building River Dialogue and Governance program. He's an environmental lawyer with a trajectory in policy and legal formulation, implementation, and diplomacy in over 60 countries around the world. Thank you.
So you can leave the definitions because I'm not going to say anything new. I was asked to speak about conducting water diplomacy, and I will try to share with you some of my thoughts after working on this issue with IUCN for more than 20 years. When we speak about conducting water diplomacy, I have to refer to three distinct aspects, and I'm sure that the colleagues that are going to give the examples afterwards will elaborate on them. First of all, the actors. Second, the levels. And third, the tools. All of this in the understanding that when I refer to the actors, I speak about the stakeholders or the agents of change, what I think. When I talk about the levels, I relate to the stages or the layers in which diplomacy takes place. And when I speak about the tools, I speak about the mechanisms used to advance water cooperation in real terms. Let me first then start with the actors. In order to deal with the whole spectrum of transboundary governance complexities, you will agree with me that it is necessary to ponder upon the engagement of many actors, which includes heads of states, which includes career diplomats, which includes utility managers, which includes regulators, engineers, lawyers, but also the civil society. I'm talking about the doers, but also the makers. The role of all these actors is going to vary depending on the realities and the complexities of each of the basins, the states of the basins, and the realities of the people in the basins at large. When the negotiation of an agreement is at stake, and I'm coming now from a session in which we were discussing precisely all that in the context of river basin organizations, far and foremost the actors, the stakeholders, are the diplomats and the civil servants. But that does not mean that water diplomacy only takes place, is conducted, as the title of my presentation is about, within the negotiation of such agreements, and during that negotiation only. Dialogues and collaborations can be induced when those that are closer to the water, and I'm looking at you guys, that are going to speak about the challenges in Central Asia and in the Middle East, see the means whereby cooperation can actually happen. And that is people, communities, but not only people and the communities, the society at large, those that use the water. Having spoken about the actors, let me now go to the levels. Water diplomacy is by nature a multifaceted set of processes that operate at different levels and involves different actors. The days in which diplomacy was something precluded to ministries of foreign affairs are long gone, particularly as far as water is concerned. When I speak about the levels, I refer to the series of the interactions that take place in the realm of decision-making, and more broadly on governance and the engagement of a pluralism of stakeholders within and between the different levels that I referred before. In other words, it is just not a matter of coordinating national with subnational and local levels downstream, but also within those levels there are different interest groups where some kind of concerted action, if not coordination, is required to avoid fragmentation. Water, and you know that, but I have to say, cuts across different agencies, ranging from natural resources, trade, infrastructure, tourism, transportation, agriculture, food, health, and so on, and the list can go on and on. And all these agencies have different perceptions, different perspectives, different approaches regarding water, which require some level of coordination or at least concerted action to foster convergence if we want diplomacy to be effective. Endeavors in a transboundary basin relate to multiple actors. Again, I come back to the actors and to the sectors that include water, energy, food, transport, infrastructure. So the need to take appropriate actions across the sectors and the levels is a must to guarantee effectiveness and avoid tensions and conflicts within a state and between the states. Now, the last segment of my discussion, the tools. When I speak about diplomacy, when you speak about diplomacy, almost automatically we tend to relate it to agreements between states, treaties. However, the answer is not that easy because we have to make some important distinctions and differentiations as far as I'm concerned. First, in terms of the agreements themselves. They can be of different kinds. They can be water agreements, they can be non-water agreements, and they all relate to water diplomacy. They can deal with water, they can deal with basins, they can be formal, they can be less formal. They can operate at a bilateral level, they can operate at multilateral levels, They can be basin, they can be local, they can be regional agreements, and they can all contribute to frame complementarities and foster water cooperation between states. You will agree with me. I'm not saying anything new, but I'm just making this distinction, which I think is very relevant for conducting water diplomacy. I know I have only 1 minute. Tools also include, beyond agreements, strategies, plans, policies, and institutions at large to mobilize and implement cooperation. But ultimately, they depend on effective capacities of cooperation agents. Therefore, capacity strengthening is also an integral part of the diplomacy puzzle, and I mean with this not only training and academic programs and tools, but also education, sensitization, political campaigns, discussion, TV programs, social media, etc. All that I cannot deal with, especially social media, is also important for water diplomacy, for conducting water diplomacy. Last but not least, the spaces where all that happens. Where is diplomacy conducted? Diplomacy stakeholders converge at different places, not only in formal consultations in capital cities, in New York, in Geneva, in Entebbe, Calist, but also in less formal dialogues, technical meetings like here. We're doing somehow contributing to water diplomacy here in Stockholm. Again, here I think it is essential to make a distinction that these spaces are not only provided by the states in the form of a basin organization, a river or a lake commission, or a formal negotiation, but also platforms in which civil society at large delivers over water. Such spaces are relevant not only to legitimize decision-making, but also to find comprehensive solutions to the multiple challenges relating to transboundary waters. For over 2 decades, we in IUCN have been instrumental in setting up these spaces, being them interstate, binational, being them multi-stakeholders, or a combination of all of them. There is no set of procedures, and with that I'm finishing, that can be implemented whereby the governance challenges of a shared basin will be resolved and diplomacy will be effective. It is essential, and I conclude, first of all, to understand the realities of the ground, to apply a solution that is custom-made to that realities and be flexible, because at the end of the day, we might have to adjust the course of action when needed or when it is imposed by the circumstances. I think I concluded in 8 minutes. Maria, is that okay? Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. Next up, we have Katja Alfors. Katja is the Director for the Center of Peace Mediation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Finland. Welcome to the stage, Katja.
Thank you, Sylvie. Is this all right? Thank you. Let me start by thanking the co-conveners for doing this. We are really delighted and glad to be here. And it's actually the first year that the Ministry for Foreign Affairs is a key collaborative partner. So also a big thank you especially to SIWI. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I've been asked to talk a little bit about how the Finnish Foreign Ministry approaches water diplomacy. Yesterday, our Foreign Minister Elina Valtonen addressed the opening session, and she stated that water is strongly linked with geopolitics and which is recognized in our foreign and security policy. Actually, Finland published a white paper on foreign and security policy just this June. The purpose is, of course, to highlight how we safeguard Finland's independence and territorial integrity, how to avoid becoming involved in a military conflict, and to improve the security and well-being of the people in Finland. Rule of law and international law, as well as human rights, are core values to us. Unfortunately, Finland's security environment has deteriorated fundamentally and in the long term. Russia has shown that it does not respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of state, and it has blatantly violated the UN Charter. In such a situation, our foreign and security policy, founded on value-based realism, has also led us to recently join NATO, together with Sweden. However, alongside emphasizing and putting a lot of resources on hard security, Finland continues to invest in broader security. It's noteworthy that peace is mentioned in the first article of our constitution. We cherish our long-term commitment to support peaceful settlements of conflicts, as well as our broad first-hand experience of international water affairs. Multilateralism and supporting multilateralism has always been at the center of our foreign relations, and this also shows very well in our work both on peace mediation and international water cooperation, where we for a long time have been supporting and actively working for establishing the normative frameworks. Next year, we will chair the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And we are also soon starting and building up our campaign as we are seeking a seat in the UN Security Council for the years 29-30. And these commitments will guide our preparations for these. Ladies and gentlemen, natural resources have become an integral part of global geopolitics. Nation-states are safeguarding their food and energy security, mineral supplies, and water security needs. And this is being done not only for the time being, but also looking at the future. At times, countries are securing their water interests in a balanced and equitable manner through global conventions. In less positive cases, countries do it through unilateral actions, typically if one country is located upstream of the basin. Fortunately, though, transboundary waters have tended to be a source of cooperation rather than conflict. An increasing amount of strategic interests around natural resources are in play by nations as well as within states. Simultaneously, climate change is causing increasingly frequent and more severe water-related disasters. These have significant impacts not only to economies, but to people's lives and the environment. The highest price is paid by the most vulnerable populations, as always. A simplified way to describe water diplomacy is the following: any diplomacy that is well informed and framed by water and natural resources analysis. So how do we then conduct water diplomacy in practice? Finland is ready to offer its services to parties of water disputes, always based on the willingness by the parties concerned. We can support different processes in multiple ways. For us, water diplomacy is proactive mediation and conflict resolution, and a preferred way to mitigate and prevent water-related tensions. Any dispute can only be resolved by parties themselves. External facilitators can only create an enabling space for negotiations and trust building. As the late President Martti Ahtisaari, a renowned peace mediator and Nobel Prize laureate, stated, "Peace is a matter of will. All conflicts can be settled." We should keep this spirit in mind also when looking into water-related tensions. For us at the Foreign Ministry, our missions abroad are a key tool when we are building up our state-level engagement in peace mediation. Their analysis of any given situation is often the first step when considering options for a more proactive engagement. Is there a role for an outside actor? And is Finland rightly placed and resourced to play that role? The timeline is also extremely important and is often determined by geopolitics. We prefer to use water diplomacy as an umbrella term that is linked to all natural resources. The solutions are not found in the water domain alone, but in other sectors such as energy, agriculture, or forestry. This underlines the importance of a nexus approach, enabling better understanding of the synergies between water, energy, and food ecosystems. Ladies and gentlemen, as this seminar series well outlines, one should not overcomplexify transboundary water issues. At the same time, there are multiple factors that impact water-related tensions. We see it as pivotal that water diplomatic efforts are based on a thorough analysis of the relevant political, environmental, social, and economic dynamics. A few years ago, it became clear to us that a tool was needed to understand upfront activities that could be taken to prevent, mitigate, and resolve water-related disputes. In other words, to conduct water diplomacy. And in order to address this need, we created a water diplomacy conflict analysis tool together with the Finnish Institute of International Affairs and the Finnish Environment Institute. This tool attempts to build up an adequate understanding of the operating environment in which water diplomatic efforts are to be implemented. It is a preventive and forward-looking tool aiming at finding a menu of activities for us to use. In the analysis, we combined natural resources and foreign and security policy processes into one analysis. And this tool is freely available online. And we have realized that this tool helps us to utilize the established terminology of peace mediation, conflict analysis, but to apply it in the context of natural resources. Based on existing information, a lighter analysis can be conducted, but an in-depth analysis requires a deeper dive into the factors, actors, and dynamics. In either case, that analysis is only a snapshot in time. If needed, it can be replicated or amended periodically, and ideally, a frequently updated conflict analysis could be used as a foresight tool that would lead to early preventive action. After conducting an analysis, the processes of diplomacy can follow. It may be that we create a technical water negotiation path alongside an actual peace negotiation track. Or we support the actual negotiation track with strategic water thinking, enabling mediators and diplomats to see a wider horizon of possibilities. Dear colleagues, diplomacy is the profession and skill of managing international relations. Even if diplomats represent their state, thus a larger and formal entity, the profession is conducted by individuals. Individuals who build up relationships, trust, in order to pass messages and find common ground. In-person meetings are the way to build trust between individuals and therefore a necessity in diplomacy. This may mean a lot of traveling, often called shuttle diplomacy. Shuttle diplomacy may sometimes enable parties to send messages to each other via third party. In such a situation, a trusted water diplomat may become a back channel for a dialogue between parties. especially in cases where the parties are not in a position to meet formally. Another and rather typical form of be it peace mediation or water diplomacy is providing a confidential and safe space for parties to meet. Getting away from their own region helps people to step out of daily routines and official roles. People tend to relax, listen, hear, and engage more freely. This is, of course, becoming more difficult when social media follow us far too deep, even to these trusted spaces. Establishing ground rules is usually the first agenda point at such gatherings. These are a few examples of trust building around transboundary waters, where actually the shared waters can provide a unique context for negotiation. Organizing, for example, a series of informal meetings along a shared river basin can underline the importance of shared resources and thus facilitate better dialogue and also trust building. In general, water diplomacy processes aim at building trust between the parties in order to move away from political positions towards dialogue. This may be possible through different kinds of approaches, such as emphasizing the shared benefits of the transboundary waters, focusing on data sharing or joint water monitoring, or generating institutional mechanisms in the shared water basin. Dear colleagues, water is a life-essential and irreplaceable resource crossing human-made boundaries. This is why we need water diplomacy, and this is why Finland will continue investing in water diplomacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katja. And lastly, before we move on to our panel discussion, please welcome Bota Sharipova. Bota is originally from Kazakhstan and is currently pursuing a PhD at the IHE Delft Institute for Water Education, focusing on the role of trust in transboundary water cooperation. All yours, Bota.
Yeah, perfect. Yes, here. Yes, thank you so much. So today I'm going to make a presentation about conducting hydro diplomacy with a specific focus on trust building. And already excellent points were mentioned by Katja about very specific examples how trust can be built. And here I would like to first just to highlight the importance of trust for water diplomacy, as trust is one of the aims of water diplomacy, one of the main aims, because it allows to build reliable long-term relationship and also to envision in future successful outcomes of this cooperation, which then allows this cooperation to happen. And at the same time, trust is also one of the outcomes of water diplomacy. And as was already mentioned by Alejandro, also formal mechanisms of cooperation or practices help building trust. But at the same time, I would like to add that informal practices are also quite important for building trust, as was also mentioned by Katja. And then just to remind you something that all of us know from our personal life and relationships, that earning trust actually takes a lot of time, but losing it or eroding it, it can happen really quickly and fast. And that applies to the relationship between countries as well in managing their shared rivers. And probably all of us who have experience of working with transboundary waters know that there are so many events or practices or situations or factors which actually do not allow trust to emerge so easily between countries. And then here we can mention transboundary factors, for example, dependencies, power asymmetries, or hegemony, or long-term rivalry relationship between countries. Then there are governance factors when centralized, non-inclusive, top-down decision-making or changing governments doesn't really allow one country to be that open to cooperation with another. Or we can also name behavior of states, for example, politicization and securitization of water issues, then instrumentalizing water opportunism, water nationalism, and probably other factors which are not really helping in building trust, let's say, and then we can also say that these are sources of mistrust in water diplomacy. And then there was this excellent article written by Marko Keskinen, Elina Hakkinen, and some other authors about very specific activities in water diplomacy which help to build trust. But today in this presentation, I would like to focus on very specific processes which are there across or cross-cutting different activities or areas of cooperation which can actually help in building trust between countries. Again, keeping in mind all those factors which can be kind of hindering or constraining this trust-building process. And these are horizontal connections, depoliticization, and institutionalization of trust. And these processes were derived based on my PhD research, and I did this research using 2 case studies focusing on these 2. It's post-Yugoslavian countries of Sava River Basin in southeastern Europe and post-USSR countries of Sardaria River Basin, which is in Central Asia. And here about the first process that I would like to discuss is these horizontal connections, which was already mentioned before and also in other sessions, how important it is for people across the boundaries, those who are involved in water management, in data sharing, so just as their professional activity, to have certain connections, to know each other and to be able to speak professional language, to be able to connect based on their expertise and knowledge that they have in common. It's like, it's for example, it can be hydrologists and GIS experts saying, okay, we just need to have this hydrological model, let's just make it done. And then we also know that there is also certain social and psychological bonding which can happen between people who just like each other. For example, that was the case in Aral Sea Basin, that once the presidents of 2 countries, of Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, didn't like each other, let's say, then the relationship between 2 countries, especially in sharing waters, were really bad. But then once the president changed, then the relationships changed overnight, and the relationship formal and also informal. Then we know that there might be also certain shared goals and responsibilities, as we said, for example, for hydrological model that they're supposed to develop despite maybe different interests of the countries. And this all create these horizontal connections, but at the same time we can also ask a question, does it really help when we have this, for example, rivalry between countries, or where high-level politicians say, no, we don't want to cooperate, for example, or share data? And this is where I would like to discuss depoliticization. It is a process that I observed which happened in the Sava River Basin, where they managed to develop very well cooperation on Sava River Basin after war that they had in Yugoslavia, in former Yugoslavia in 90s. And then the process of depoliticization then included trying to avoid discussing water-related issues between the politicians, high-level politicians, but trying to keep it between water experts. And then when I went there for interviews, some of them were referring to their water diplomacy as technical water diplomacy, because then it helps them in this fluctuating or varying political, very quickly changing political climate. It helps them to keep water diplomacy to the level of like more like technical, what makes more sense, what's more feasible from a technical perspective. And then there are some workarounds. So, for example, they, instead of saying that, because in post-Yugoslavian countries, they speak mostly the same Serbo-Croatian language, but then in the official reports that they use, which language should they call that they use? Should they say we speak Serbian or Croatian or Bosnian? And that became really sensitive issue, and that's also the case in some other basins in the world. And then they were creative enough to call it Sava language, to depoliticize it through just changing the name. And after that, everyone was fine just to continue using it. And the last factor that I would like to discuss is institutionalization of trust, which refers here to the process where institutions also are flexible and accommodating enough to capture the good or positive level of trust which is there between the countries or between the high-level officials. And this allows trust to expand beyond only one case situation, so that there is good trust between, for example, I don't know, hydrologists in certain ministries or between ministers even. But then when there are certain institutional mechanisms which are there, which allow to, at this moment, for example, to sign additional protocol or something, and then this is what helps this trust to sustain even when people change. And this was, again, quite successfully done in the Sava River Basin Commission, how they managed to complement their Sava River Basin Agreement with additional protocols, policy papers, to really, again, formally to capture all this progress in their trust building and in their water diplomacy efforts. That's it from me, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak here.
Thank you very much, Bota. And if I can ask you just to stay on the stage, we have time for 2 questions maybe from the audience. So maybe Alejandro and Katya can join us as well. And I think we have a microphone somewhere. Does anyone have a question for our speakers? Maybe some, oh, we've got one at the back there. And then I think we'll also take this one at the front, and then we can answer both together. Thank you.
Hi, Brian Eiler from the Stimson Center. Great presentations. My question's more for Bota, where you noted that a way to build trust is to avoid some of the high politics and maybe sensitivities. In a world where we're pitching more towards climate crises and climate-induced hazards and fewer resources, how does a new situation kind of challenge that avoidance of politicization or sensitive issues if trust is to continue to be built?
Thank you. Could we just pass the microphone to the front, and then we'll answer both questions? Thank you. I think we had a question here.
Thank you for your wonderful presentations. My question is also for you, Bota. My name is Ada. I'm with the U.S. Agency for International Development, and I was wondering if you'd seen any examples of effective trust building and what that looked like.
Yeah, should I go?
Yeah,
thank you. Thank you. Very nice questions. And regarding the first one, indeed, when we say water diplomacy, we have this exactly 2 words, right? Water, which can be related to more technical part, and diplomacy, which relate more to politics and diplomacy. And then again, when we, in this world, when we started to realize all the interconnectedness between climate change and all those impacts that it's making all over the world, all these linkages, of course, they also require certain, authorization or permission or procession from the politicians, and that's kind of unavoidable. And especially that happens, of course, where, for example, water is scarce or climate is inducing so many challenges or raising so many challenges. And in that sense, unfortunately, I don't have answer. But this is something that we are indeed observing in the world, that, less scarce or more the issue is problematized, then more it becomes politicized, securitized. Yeah, thank you. And regarding the second question, yes, there are quite many cases, especially I would say, these cases of successful trust building through water diplomacy, transboundary water cooperation comes from Europe, and I think from US-Canada relationship, when we see that there was a long period of repetitive, iterative actions where countries proved to each other that they are trustworthy and reliable. I think this is where most of the successful cases are coming from. But for example, in Sava case, it was also proved because this cooperation is pretty new, from 2002. But already they have developed this trustful relationship. But here the question is also that there is an abundance of water. They are not struggling that much with the amount of water versus, for example, in Sardarea Basin, water is scarce, and then issues become immediately very high in the political agenda. Yeah.
Thank you. Do Katya or Alejandro want to make any final remarks?
Maybe just a quick comment that I think you cannot avoid the politics of it, and therefore you need to also keep having these discussions at different levels and different fora.
You know, I was just thinking about a case which is very close to our work that relates to two countries in South America, Peru and Ecuador. The first time I visited them 35 years ago, they were almost at war. You know, crossing the border between Ecuador and Peru was a challenge, you know, almost impossible. For Peruvians or Ecuadorians, for me, being a foreigner to these two countries was easier. Now these two countries have signed an agreement that regulates the entire boundary, and I'm coming from a session in which, you know, I heard about the establishment of binational schools, binational programs, you know, a whole set of sensitization programs that go beyond trust building, political will, and so on and so forth. So I think it required at some point someone, in this case were the politicians, but listening to people, to the realities on the ground, people that were brothers and sisters, are brothers and sisters. There is a lot of communication, transborder, you know, trade and connections. And there was a need to reflect upon that and say, well, we have to come up, you know, with a solution to that. And they signed the agreement. And now it's just a matter of implementing that, you know, and yeah, so look at that particular example because you were asking for that particular example, or if not, you know, come to us and then I can share some more experiences on that with you later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to have to wrap up there, but thank you to all of our speakers for such interesting presentations. And now please welcome Marko Keskinen, an SPC member here at World Water Week and Associate Professor at Aalto University, Finland. Welcome, Marko.
Thanks, Sylvia, and thanks everybody who presented so far. We'll move to the panel discussion part of our session, and I would like to invite all our panelists on stage. So first, Christina Lepp, who is a Senior Counsel at the Environment and International Law Department at the World Bank, advising on law and public international law and bank policies, having long-term experience. You can pick your chair. Then we have Nada from EcoPeace Middle East, our co-conveners, being the Palestinian co-director of the EcoPeace and joining EcoPeace in 2018, formerly also working as a consultant, researcher, and practitioner in the environmental management field. Francesca Bernardini, who is now Chief of Transparency Cooperation in the UN Economic Commission for Europe, and has worked for long on UN Water Courses Convention, or which we Finns at least like to call Helsinki Convention. And then Katja Alfors, who was already presenting with you, Director of Center for Peace Mediation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland. And then Kalist Tindi Mugaya, who is a Commissioner of Water Resources Planning and Regulation at the Ministry of Water and Environment in Uganda. Long-term expert on water resources management, but also long-term expert on transboundary cooperation, both bilaterally and multilaterally in the Nile setting. And how we run, how the idea is to run this second part of the panel is to try to answer 3 questions that we already heard, some initial thoughts on who are the actors on water diplomacy, what is the process actually, how to conduct it, and why is it done, and how it links to the politics of it. But before getting there, except from Katja, who already presented, from others, I would like to invite just a short key takeaway from the first 3 presentations we heard. A lot of different kind of ideas. So what would you like to share as a one key takeaway among many? Christina, you could start.
I'll start. You said you worked on the definition of hydrodiplomacy, and I'm going to steal words from each one of the presenters to give you a new definition.
Okay.
And hydrodiplomacy is the process where actors, no matter at which level they engage, employ tools to achieve shared benefits through a step-by-step approach based on tangible outcomes. There you go.
Okay, thanks, Christina.
Wow, that was efficient and quick. I have too many because basically all the presentations that were given, some of the statements really brought me back home and brought me to the chaos that Gideon and I have to deal with along with our Jordanian co-director. One of them is the space to make legitimate decision-making processes, and this requires the engagement of civil society. I have the multi-stakeholder engagement, and that there's no single process, and it has always to be accustomed and accommodated to the conditions on the ground. And this is, again, the role of civil society where they can contribute. The highest price is paid by the most vulnerable. This takes me home again. And it requires a lot of, and a great deal of working on water diplomacy. Timeline is often determined by geopolitics. That's your statement. Again, it takes me back home to our daily chaos. Yeah, these are my intakes. There's a lot for me to share, but these are key issues that we really, in the platform of discussing water diplomacy, I think these are key issues that we need to focus on.
Yeah. Thanks, Nada. Francesca.
I really love the sentence, peace is a matter of will, and I think cooperation is a matter of will. And I couple it a lot with this don't over-complexify. I think for all those actors who are like many of us here, our role is to facilitate cooperation. We really need to understand the reality on the ground. We really need to understand the water, the stakes, but also the political actor, what they believe, what they do. And sometimes this complex information can paralyze us. Really and it's very important at that moment. I'm not talking not understanding, but just do it. Just remember what our objective is, to support country in cooperating and go head on and support it. Because otherwise you might really get lost in what the minister said and then the advisor of the minister has an interest there. No, do it.
Thank you very much. Some key takeaways from me. One is that water diplomacy will involve different stakeholders, and the stakeholders will depend on the kind of engagement you are in and the level you are at, but also the importance of rebuilding trust. Very, very key, and also ensuring that the different stakeholders are given an opportunity to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you, Kallistan. Maybe you can actually keep the mic, because my first question about the actors would be actually for you. You mentioned the key stakeholders, but when we talk about the actors, from your perspective and experience, both on bilateral and multilateral settings, how would you define the key actors? We heard calls for engaging all, but who would you see are in the core of those activities you have been working on?
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm going to respond using 3 examples. One example is the basin-wide engagement in the Nile Basin, where we were negotiating the agreement on the Nile, the cooperative framework agreement on the Nile. And here, the basin states were actually represented by the lawyers, because we are discussing legal issues, by the technical people from water, and also the diplomats. Those were the key players, because again, we wanted to make sure that the countries are getting the best out of these negotiations. But we also had other government agencies that were bringing in sectoral inputs. Ministries of energy, ministries of security, agriculture, industry, transport, all coming in at that level. But we also had another technical diplomacy. I think what was raised, we did decide that we undertake activities following a 2-track approach. One was the political track, which involved the negotiation of the cooperative framework agreement, but we had a technical track, which was actually involving the technical people. And since 1999, the technical track actually has continued. We have built trust, we have achieved a lot within the basin states, and this has involved the technical people. Technical people, water people, agriculture people, environment people, depending on what you are dealing with. And to me, that has actually made diplomatic engagement successful because we all speak the same language. Even when there are challenges, we have focused on the technical aspects and also the benefits. The other one is the work we have done between Uganda and Kenya, supported by UNEC, IUCN, IGAD, where we have brought the two countries together. Actually, we have brought cooperation to the people on the ground, where we got the national level institutions, again, ministries of water, ministries of finance, and ministry of foreign affairs, but we have brought people on the ground where we have engaged the local governments. In Kenya, they have counties. In Uganda, we have districts. We have brought them on board. We have brought the civil society, the community representatives, the private sector, and we have tried to engage to see how we can actually cooperate over shared water resources. And through those engagements, we have come up with actually investment projects, which we are already implementing. And through that engagement, we have really tried to get the people to appreciate why we needed to engage and how we needed to cooperate. And to me, as somebody has been part of Transboundary Water Corporation, it's the first time we are bringing cooperation to the people. And people appreciating the importance of working together, because previously we discussed at the national level, but this time around we are discussing with the people and they are seeing the benefits on the ground. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Already in the presentation, and Katja did mention the importance of broader diplomacy, and as a kind of career diplomat and the director of Peace Mediation Center, how you see now when we are in the World Water Week and we talk quite watery things, how do you see, you know, what are the kind of the key processes and perhaps also actors that we could kind of draw from the broader field of peace mediation, conflict resolution, to complement those, what Kalis mentioned?
Thank you. Yeah, maybe a few reflections, since, as you said, I'm really approaching these questions from the perspective of somebody who is a professional in diplomacy and international relations, and not at all, in a way, on water topics. But I've often thought that when we're talking about water diplomacy, in many cases, we might not even need to say water because we're talking, the topics are, and the situation are so similar to when we're talking about diplomacy in general. But focusing on peace mediation and conflict resolution, where it really relates to what we're discussing here today on disagreements related to water, I think there are a few things that might be useful to highlight. One is the need to think out of the box. This is what you often need in conflict resolution, and might probably be needed in these situations where it's related to water, and to be creative and to accept that you sometimes need to be very fast and able to move fast, make quick decisions, but at the same time what you're actually talking about is something that's very slow and long term. An example, you can fairly quickly sign an agreement, but implementing it and building a sustainable peace will take long. We'll need to involve everybody and the whole of society. And this is also why at some point and different points you need to have a multi-sector approach. You need to involve different kind of expertise on international law, on governance, on water, and so on. But to realize that you will have different tracks, different kind of processes, and to recognize that maybe you can move at one level, and that's valuable even if you cannot move on the other levels. Sorry for a long answer.
No, I think that was nice. Maybe actually to kind of complement and continue from that, and also a little bit perhaps challenge, I think Alejandro really nicely emphasized the importance also to work across levels and engaging all. But what I'm having in my mind is that, okay, it's really a nice idea. Is it feasible always? Are we supposed to coordinate all those actors together? Or are we happy those kind of going in their own ways, as you kind of hinted, that one process might be going? So up for grabs for anybody to comment on that based on experiences. This is not the first session where we have heard that we need to engage all. So how actually do that? Is it always feasible? Is it okay sometimes to be selective in water diplomacy processes?
May I just quickly add that I didn't mean that you always need to engage, or you cannot always engage everyone.
Yeah.
And there will be often successful outcomes, for example, in conflict prevention, might be something that you're never told about. It might be really important that a meeting didn't take place. And especially important that it's never mentioned.
Yeah. Christina?
I mean, I think the key aspect is sort of what's the purpose of the process. So really looking at, okay, what is the objective or the benefit in the case of water that we are trying to achieve by getting together? And that will tell us who and at which level needs to be engaged.
Yeah.
I think it really depends also on who is initiating water diplomacy. If it's at a government level, we're expecting that they would want to reach out, or it's ideal that they reach out to all stakeholders, but this doesn't really happen. If it's initiated by foreign or third parties and external parties to mediate efforts between basically two contesting parties, then there is a created safe space that would allow this third party to bring everyone on the table. And if it's initiated by civil society, like we do at EcoPeace, we definitely try to engage all sectors of the society, from the students to the teachers to the young professionals to business community to farmers to even politicians and to technical people. And it's often us who are seeking to speak to the governments and create these connections and create the space for water diplomacy. But unfortunately, what we face as a civil society organization is that we're pushed away, especially at times of crisis, where they think, well, why do we have to listen to these tree huggers while we have so much more important things to deal with at the moment? So it really depends on the momentum and who's actually initiating the water diplomacy effort.
Did you want to compliment Francesca?
I don't think there's much more to add. There's not one size fits all in cooperation processes, and therefore what Christina said is the format has to match the objective, and often you break down the objective in smaller achievable objectives. So sometimes you start with a smaller group with a narrow scope, and then you have that, and then you can broaden up to other constituency and progressively do it. So I think that's a bit what's the history we all learned from.
And it's also nice and kind of bringing this all together, and again possibly misinterpreting part of your words, is that when you are looking for the purpose, it also depends who is actually kind of convening and thinking about it. Yesterday already we were talking that, you know, it's kind of multiple processes, and actually you view the problem quite differently depending obviously on your viewpoint. So then you get to those parallel tracks. Okay, something about that who question covered. For the sake of time, let's get to the how question. As we used at the beginning, oh, it wasn't there. Sorry. I thought that there would have been the definition again, but just that we were talking about the art being the kind of diplomacy as a mean of building relations and political will to enable collaboration. So when we get to that, so how you actually build those relations, I would like to Christina maybe to answer first.
Yeah, I come back to the purpose of having diplomacy. In the sense of sort of our organization, the World Bank is really engaged in what I think, Bota, you mentioned, technical water diplomacy. And what we experienced is that we can only start the relation building and keep everybody at the table for the process if there is a clear objective and a benefit that is perceived by everyone. So it's sort of like there must be a reason why we're getting all together, and that reason, unfortunately, as we've seen in the water sector, often has to be an emergency. A lot of treaties came out of emergencies. But that is really sort of key, sort of having a purpose finding the right stakeholders, the right people who can work on it, and keep them engaged in the process. Because what we have also had initiatives where we were engaged in relation building, but unless you have an outcome that is a benefit to the ones who are engaged, they will not stay engaged. So that is key, I think, to really sort of start the relationship, build it, and then also continue the process to actually get to a result.
Do you have any complementary notes?
I would put it in 4 main titles in terms of the how, in terms of the process, educate, and to make the parties learn about each other's reality, staying relevant to the moment and to the actual context, thinking long-term together, and depoliticizing. And we've seen this very evident and successful in our recent regional teachers training that we conducted in the middle of the war of Palestinian, Jordanian, and Israeli teachers, really putting concrete ideas for water diplomacy teaching in our schools. It's a clear example of how we can do diplomacy.
Yeah. Thanks, really nice 4 steps. Francesca, you also have a quite long-term experience on kind of looking at different cooperation processes. So when we are talking about water diplomacy, I think one issue is that how we initiate that and how we define the common purpose and who is actually initiating it. And the other one is then that once it's initiated, how we sustain it in a kind of a positive manner, whatever dynamics are there. I think Brian Ehler and others were already noting the kind of changing dynamics also in the different contexts. So how do you see, how would you kind of share your views on this? How does that happen?
I think I would like to stress the importance of the Water Convention in that respect. The Water Convention is a UN instrument which it aims to foster cooperation on transboundary water through the establishment of agreement and institution. So the objective is actually to institutionalize cooperation. And it actually works in the sense that parties to the convention report every 3 years on their implementation, and now we just finished the analysis of the current reporting exercise, and it comes out that all parties have almost agreement of almost all the transboundary water that they share with other parties, and the problems are with non-parties. So it's an instrument that has been able to institutionalize cooperation. And it's because the whole instrument and what has been built around the rules is really geared towards this support and this facilitation. And there are really a lot of ways the convention support the establishment and maintenance of cooperation. I'd like to give an example of an institution. There's a body established under the convention, which is the Implementation Committee, which is a body composed of 9 individual experts. So they act in their individual capacity, completely independent. They are esteemed and well-known lawyer and technical expert. And this body is responsible for facilitating and safeguarding implementation and compliance with the convention. And in 2019, Montenegro approached the Implementation Committee with serious concern about building of small hydropower on the Sigivna-Siem River, which is a river share between Albania and Montenegro, and Albania was planning to develop further hydropower. And the committee therefore decided to use its advisory procedure, which is a facilitating procedure. Exactly, there's a conflict, there's a potential conflict there. How do we solve it? So it invited Albania to join this advisory procedure, and Albania approved. And the committee engaged for more than a year with the 2 countries, gathering information, having bilateral consultation and trilateral consultation. And at the end, it came out with an independent advice, legal and technical advice, in which it clarifies the obligation of the convention to the country. So it provided a key to understand it. And then it made a very, very important move. Instead of trying to address the issue at stake, is there an issue of breaking the convention, non-compliance? It addressed the systemic issue. The committee said, you have to establish, to the 2 countries, you have to establish a joint working group on monitoring and assessment. You have to start exchanging information. You have to have a platform where you discuss plan measure. And the 2 countries approved the advice. They established a joint working group, and the committee has continued following it, so it actually even participated in the meeting of this working group. So to me, it's a fantastic example to show that you need sometimes third party which have authority, which have expertise can help. Those parties do not have to enter into the conflict, but have to look at what's the systemic issue, how you can help, and then also the follow-up. And this is just one of the many examples of the way that the framework of the convention has been helping, but to me it's very interesting to know for country which might have a potential conflict that there's a place in the UN where they can knock on the door and see whether there's a solution that can be found.
Thanks, really nice example. Maybe I would like to invite Kallis if you want. How do this resonate as a how to do water diplomacy, what we have heard so far?
Thank you very much. I think the importance of capacity building. Once you're engaged in diplomatic engagements, you need to make sure that the capacities are comparable. We have seen over the years that once you have engagements between the parties and one party is very well capacitated, another one has low capacity, the engagements may actually not be meaningful. So within the Nile Basin Initiative, one of the things we invested in is to build the capacity across the basin states, so that when you start an engagement, then you speak the same language and you're able to listen to each other. And I've seen that has worked. And again, that has happened through the technical diplomacy. And this has facilitated, again, the engagement on the political track. Thank you.
And thanks reminding about those kind of two tracks of technical and political, often combining together, and also actually linking to the issue that I had in my mind when I heard Francesca talking about this kind of importance of institutionalized processes. How do you see, I mean, water diplomacy does happen in institutionalized settings, but also in non-institutionalized settings, even hostile settings. So any kind of views on that, you know, how does the process then work, and what would be different up for grabs for any panelist? Katja has a mic on her hand. And wants to get rid of it.
I'll always take the difficult questions. That's what Gideon does to me sometimes. Well, I can bring here a real-time experience. A civil society organization from the Middle East, operating still on all feet and still surviving the tragic times. But what has been working for us very well is to keep communicating and to understand the realities on the ground, to explain these realities to each other, who are living two different realities and two different narratives based on what the media shows. What is helping us, again, to stay relevant and to be able to address the current situation in terms of provision of water across the board, and how to make water be, at least when we address Gaza, on how to get water into Gaza. And we've been working on this extensively, Gideon and I, and with our advocacy team, in order to facilitate the process of understanding things on the ground, understanding what humanitarian aid needs to get in, and exchanging this information of bottlenecks, etc. What we can do, what we cannot do, what is on our shoulder, what is beyond our capacity. But what is important also, that we are not only addressing the short term, we are one of the few that is looking into the long term and the day after. And what needs to be done to rehabilitate the water and sanitation and infrastructure in Gaza? How do we integrate our, the Gaza reconstruction, for example, regionally? How do we seize this momentum, even if it's tragic, in order to think really long-term into regional integration, into a peace triangle between Palestine, Israel, and Jordan that is integrated in water resources, in renewable energy resources, and connected to the entire Middle East towards Europe through the IMEC proposal of or the India-Middle East Economic Corridor. These are the ideas that, even at the heart of our pain, we are still able to navigate around these difficulties and think long-term, which our countries and our governments are unfortunately unable to do that. We are now the catalysts to basically bring even international community into this discussion in order to foresee it further.
Yeah.
just to continue on that, and on the importance of information, which you so well presented, because it takes political will to make political decisions, and most of us have limited possibilities to directly influence that, and at the end it's for the politicians to do that, but to ensure that the information is there and the correct information, and that's really valuable from all different levels. And there we come to this on how also to link the local to the more national and the global, and to ensure that there is a proper understanding, and in your context, the really important thing of the long-term vision. And in this, when talking about information, I think one thing which can play a role also in water diplomacy, and I know there are many positive examples. I mean, don't undermine the power of positive examples. We need those, and they can really, in concrete terms, be used as a starting point for a discussion. Okay, something was, in some context, this was possible. And even if that same thing is not possible, it might open the mind to be more creative and find solutions.
Others who want to comment on the...
Yes, building on that, I think the importance of exchange visits. We have seen that sometimes when engagements are taking place, people may think they are the ones facing those challenges, but when they undertake exchange visits and go to other places and realize how they have sorted out those issues, they get motivation and move forward. So actually, within our countries, we are giving a lot of attention to people moving from their locality to another one, so that they can actually realize that they are not the only ones facing similar challenges, those challenges, but there is always a way if you are positive. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. A lot of things, at least in my mind, most likely in our audience minds. Before actually getting to Q&A, I will let you to do a little bit of talking amongst yourself. So turn to person next to you. You have 3 minutes time, and share the most inspiring observation so far from our panel discussion, and also what you would like to discuss more. So we use this as a bit of an opportunity also to formulate your questions. And for our online audience, you can consider these 2 themes on your own, and then kindly write your comment or question to the Zoom's chat box. So time starts now. You have half minute to finish your discussion. Okay, welcome back. I hope you had good discussion. We are moving to the we are moving to the Q&A part of our panel discussion. So I would like to invite yourself, or if you heard a really nice comment from a colleague when you discussed, you can also reveal that or question to our panelists. So mic is yours, wherever mic is. Do we have the other mic somewhere? We were supposed to have two, though. There was on the.
There was a hand raised there. I think you need to ask them to raise the hand.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Jane Mulumba from Uganda, IRC. And my question specifically goes to my commissioner, Dr. Callist. You talked about capacities and how you're building capacities. Some of these negotiations started way back. They don't seem to be ending, but people are smiling at each other because you're trying to build trust and you're being good to each other. So how are you building that pool of people to continue with these negotiations? Because like in the ministry, people retire, people move. We have negotiators who have since retired. How do you keep that momentum? How do you keep that pool? How do you recruit the pool of negotiators? How do you refresh them? Because things change along the way. Do you do refresher courses? Are there specific courses you take them through? And specifically for the Nile, in all the Nile riparian states. Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. I would like to invite other questions if there are, and we can then invite panelists. There was one here also.
Maybe we can have the online questions. I will pop up 3 that we have.
Yeah.
The first one is from Jacob, and it says, my question is more practical to Dr. Callist. How are local communities involved in the implementation of the investment programs at different levels of water governance to foster water cooperation in the Sio-Malaba-Malakisi basin between Kenya and Uganda? The second one is from Nadira Muhkamaejan. How can the youth bring their potential in fostering transboundary peace, and where the intergenerational learning can take place? And the third one is Margaret Marian Stewart. I would like more information on how EcoPeace Middle East are bringing the different parties together to practically work on ensuring water for the Gaza residents. And those are the 3 ones.
There were some very specific questions. Maybe we can take them now so that you still remember them. I think there was one at least about the local community involvement, engagement in the investments.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, within the Sio-Malaba-Malakisi between Uganda and Kenya, as I mentioned, we had a lot of engagements where we started with community engagements to identify the challenges they are faced with, what is causing them, and we are identifying also the solution. So we designed a number of projects, joint projects, projects of transboundary significance, and we packaged them into investments. And right now we have projects that have received funding, and the community is actually involved. We have created committees. We have a basin-wide working group where the community representatives are involved in ensuring that the investments meet the needs of the communities. But implementation of the activities involves the people. We have, for example, a project that we have recently negotiated between Uganda and Kenya, which is Angororo Multipurpose Water Resources Project, which has an irrigation component, has a watershed component, has a hydropower component, and a water supply component. And the community is actually involved in identification of actions to be taken, but they also be involved in implementing the interventions on the ground. We are now also negotiating an agreement, full-fledged agreement between the two countries so that we can strengthen cooperation. So, as I said, for me, that's the first time really we are bringing cooperation to the people. And it's a good example which we would want to promote so that the people can actually know why countries come together and why we sign these agreements. Oftentimes, they don't understand why we even travel. They think we just enjoy traveling. But now they know why we're actually traveling and engaging. The other issue raised by Jane, yes, the issue of negotiations which don't end. I must say that we have said negotiations on the Nile have ended. Of course, we ended in 2009 with one item, one article, which remained unresolved and was put in annex of the agreement. We moved into ratification process, and according to the agreement, 6 countries are needed for us to transit from a transitional institution to a full-fledged river basin organization. So actually this month, we received the 6th country, South Sudan, and on 17th October, the heads of states are going to meet to launch the Nile River Basin Commission so that we can move forward. Of course, it has not come easy. We still have issues to sort out. But how do we ensure that we continue really building capacity? At the technical level, I must say we have built a lot of capacity. We have now people trained at PhD level, master's level. When you go to all the 10 countries, people understand issues of water, transboundary cooperation. But the legal part, of course, we put it on the side because it was really causing problems. So we have trainings that are going on. In Uganda, we have established a Water Resources Institute, and annually we organize a training on international water and policy, again, UNEC, ICN, IGAD, UNESCO, and others have been supporting us. So we want to continue building capacity, but also having short trainings conducted by Lake Victoria Basin Commission, Nile Basin Initiative, IGAD, and our university. So we continue building capacity, but we still have a long way to go. We have also established a program for people who have retired. So we established a program that even when you retire, you should continue actually engaging. As we speak now, we have former diplomats who have retired, former water professionals, and they are part of the preparation for the heads of state summit. So we want to continue taking advantage of the capacity available as we build the capacity of the young people. Thank you.
Thanks, and really nice way actually to remind about the broad spectrum of ages also engaged. I think we need to unfortunately start to unfold. There was there one about the youth engagement? There was one specific for NADA, but did you have, Christina?
No, the youth engagement, I wanted to say something.
Yeah, maybe Christina, if that's fine, NADA, to invite, and then
perfect directly.
Yeah.
We'd start with that.
We have been working extensively to understand things on the ground, as I mentioned, through our staff in Gaza and through engaging extensively with the WASH cluster group, which is, of course, made up of several humanitarian organizations working inside Gaza, to understand and to assess the level of damage, where things need to be repaired, especially for main transmission lines of water. And therefore, we channeled this information to Gideon and his team in order to also push forward the locations where maintenance and repair for these infrastructure facilities need to be done, and of course leverage on our relationships with international community. We have also been at the beginning at the first few months been pushing for the fuel supply for WASH facilities also, and we were assessing also with the partners on ground on how much fuel is needed to power the emergency facilities for displaced people in Gaza, and therefore we also have had some breakthrough in increasing the amount of fuel. Of course, not us alone. Of course, there's a lot of people who were working on this, but Gideon and his team with a group of other public health organizations and environmental organizations have sent a letter in Hebrew language to the government of Israel to also point out the threat of pandemic disease breakout, and we've already seen the first polio case in Gaza, which we are really now alarmed about, and we're trying to educate as much as possible. We are purchasing now small-scale desalination units, and these are also impossible to get into Gaza, so we also channel the specifications of these units to Gideon, who's going to try to get approvals for those to get into Gaza and to serve the displaced people on the ground. We've been trying to do as much as possible, but there's much more needed, of course.
Yeah, I understand that very well.
Can I, as always, I'll be very quick, but I do want to respond on the youth question because I think it's a very important point. So one quick thing, just sort of what we, for instance, do is that we fund, when we do transboundary projects, we try to really have youth components included. May this be internship programs, placing people in river basin commissions, or having specific youth capacity building outreach project, but also twinning youth with older generations, and you should include your retirees in the MBI. I think retirees are great for training the next generation. The next generation is important. And I also want to say, for the SIWI organizers, and someone remarked it to me yesterday, and I always enjoy it, it's really great that there's a real focus to get a lot of young people to this event, because that's exactly how we make sure that there is a new generation of negotiators and a good water community. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Really fascinating discussion. Luckily, it doesn't have to end because after this session at 5:30, there is a welcome to all to the cocktail reception at the Finnish pavilion there on the 4th floor, so we can continue there. Luckily, I don't need to wrap up this discussion. We picked the brightest brain among our conveners, so Maria from IUCN, to do that. So welcome. Stage is yours.
Thank you. I'll keep it short because we'll all want to go and have drinks at the Finnish booth. But I want to thank first the speakers and the panelists for this really interesting and great discussion on the who, the how, and the why of water diplomacy. There was so much to pick out, so I'm just trying to keep it to the main takeaways that I got from this discussion, which was obviously the stakeholders and going beyond the state to state, bringing cooperation to the people on the ground and for them to see the benefits on the ground, to keep them engaged in the process and building this relationship. And also the interesting part on them, you know, we talk about water diplomacy, but as foreign affairs, it's just another form of diplomacy in itself, and a tool for building peace. And then the continuation of the building the trust and looking at the political track and the technical track. So when one track stops, you can continue in the other track. And building the trust because it takes so long to build it and it goes away so fast if something happens. And just don't over-complexify. We're talking about all the layers, the people, the context, the differentiations from the different regions, but just trying not to over-complexify it so that it doesn't need to be that complicated. This was, as Sylvie started us off with, the second of a 3-part seminar series on water diplomacy. We started with the what, we moved on to the who, the how, and the why, And tomorrow, we're going to get to have some really in-detail discussions with the people that have actually done or been part of these processes on the ground. We're going to get to dive into the Siomalaba Malakisi case study much deeper with the counterpart of Kalis from Kenya and one of our IUCN colleagues. We're going to be talking about building a binational commission for water between Ecuador and Peru. There's going to be examples from the Middle East and the table led by EcoPeace, by Gideon and Nada, and also looking at the two other case studies, one from Southern Africa, the Stan Priet, so more on groundwater, and then another Middle East. So we hope to see you there. It's tomorrow at 2 o'clock in room 27, so on this floor, but on the other side of just around the corner. And with that, I want to thank, obviously, everyone for being here, and also the organizers of this session for asking IUCN to co-convene, the other co-conveners, and you all for being here. Thank you.